So this is Dr. Woeller checking in here for Integrated Medicine Academy. This is the monthly installment of Great Plains Labs complimentary webinars. I thought what I would do in this talk for this month is see if we can draw a relationship between a number of different problems that we often encounter from a testing standpoint that a lot of people have, but don't necessarily know they have. So we're going to talk about glyphosate toxicity briefly, Clostridia bacteria. We're going to get more into small intestine bacterial overgrowth called SIBO, and then some other digestive system imbalances, and really broaden our horizons a bit. Because one of the things I find that a lot of people are doing with the whole SIBO intervention is they're only focusing on the SIBO test, the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth test, and they're not doing assessments in other areas. And there could be things that can contribute to SIBO, sometimes cause SIBO, and make it much more difficult to get over. So we have to take a comprehensive approach. So what is small intestine bacterial overgrowth? Well, SIBO is often a cause of irritable bowel syndrome, but not all irritable bowel syndrome is SIBO. That's why you have to do the testing. And SIBO is actually a condition where normal bacteria that are typically found in the large intestine, about 90% of bacteria, normal digestive bacteria live in the large intestine, some of them find their way into the small intestine. They start to overpopulate the small bowel, and they start to ferment different types of foods to create different gases like hydrogen and methane, and that creates the syndrome of SIBO. Now, because of the compartmentalization of the digestive system, particularly between the small bowel and the large bowel, it's known that both actually contain some unique bacteria. So we break it down, we really can think of our digestive system in three separate compartments. Well, really, you could almost, it's more than that, but from a simplistic standpoint, the stomach is separated from the small intestine by the pyloric valve. The small intestine is separated from the large intestine by the ileocecal valve. And actually, our esophagus is separated from our stomach by something called the cardiac sphincter. But our small intestine is really broken down into three parts. We have the duodenum, which is the section closest to the stomach. That's where the pancreas drops its enzymes off into the small bowel. We have the jejunum, which is the largest area of the small intestine for nutrient absorption. And then we have the ileum. That's the part that's really most immunologically active. It's further down in the small intestine, and it's the gateway, if you will, to the large intestine through the ileocecal valve. So how does SIBO occur? What I'd like for you to think about is think about SIBO as a symptom of something else. It has its own problems, it creates its own issues, but it doesn't just happen on its own. Various organisms can trigger dysfunction in the digestive tract. Giardia infections, cryptosporidium, viral infections, bacterial infections can often inflame the small bowel, particularly around the ileocecal valve area, and that can cause a leaching effect of large bowel bacteria moving backwards into the small intestine. And then there's different toxins that get produced that can contribute to motor dysfunction, where the small bowel just doesn't work well, we don't get good peristaltic activity, and it affects something called the migrating motor complex. We'll talk about that here shortly. What ends up happening in SIBO is that we get gas production in an excess form. Hydrogen gas can produce diarrhea and loose stool, along with bloating, along with flatulence, cramping, etc. Methane gas production is more related to constipation. You can have a mixed pattern where you have high methane, high hydrogen, and so you've got this mixed bowel pattern. But we can't assume that just because somebody has bloating and gas and constipation that they have methane dominant SIBO. The bowel can only react to things that are going on in only so many ways, right? The digestive system only has so many ways to talk to us about a problem. It's going to be painful. It's going to be cramping. It might be bloating. It might be gas. It might be loose stool. It might be constipation. It might be all of the above. But that doesn't mean that SIBO is happening in every single one of those circumstances. So testing is important. Now, the gases that get produced can have a damaging effect along the surface lining of the gut. This is just a graphic representation here where you see these finger-like projections. They got these hair-like structures on them. That what makes those things move, or the finger-like projections move, is the migrating motor complex activity. And these could be cells that are either secreting digestive enzymes or absorbing nutrients or releasing immune chemicals in the gut, and they can get damaged over a long period of time because of these excess gases. But there's other things that can damage them. Chronic fungal overgrowth in the bowel, Clostridia bacteria, parasitic infections can affect them as well. There are other symptoms that can be related to SIBO, heartburn or reflux. That doesn't mean that all heartburn or reflux is SIBO. You can have that because you have gastritis, or you have histamine reactions, or you've got eosinophils infiltrating the esophagus. Nausea, malabsorption, systemic complaints like body joint pain, headaches, skin disorders, those things can be associated with SIBO, but it doesn't mean that in every circumstance those issues are 100% being caused by SIBO. That's why we have to do further investigation and correlate the information to see what's going on. And there is an extensive list of other associated diseases and disorders that are thought to be related to small intestine bacterial overgrowth. But again, just because something like chronic fatigue or autism or pancreatitis or restless leg syndrome or rheumatoid arthritis is occurring doesn't mean that it's SIBO related. It's been associated with those conditions, but those conditions can be associated with other problems as well. Now, clearly, many of these can be linked to toxicity in general, whether that's bacterial toxicity, fungal toxicity, chemical toxicity. Again, we have to get out of the narrowed viewpoint that everything is SIBO related just because we have bowel problems, and learn how to expand our horizons. What are some factors that can lead to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Well, a lack of hydrochloric acid, lack of enzyme production, or even bile acid production coming from the liver could be a contributing factor. Damage along the surface lining of the gut, what's called the brush border, that can lead to SIBO. Okay, and that could occur because of a gluten intolerance or some other food sensitivity issue. It could occur because of some pathogen like a parasite. We get damage, inflammation that doesn't allow us to release enzymes effectively to digest our carbohydrates. That could be a contributing factor too. Improper ileocecal valve function. That could occur because, again, of inflammation in the ileum, the last part of the small intestine. Sorry, my screen keeps skipping forward here. Sometimes people have intestinal surgery that disrupts the normal anatomy in the area between the ileum and the large intestine. Biofilm. Clearly biofilm can be a problem in SIBO, but it can be a problem in other chronic infections as well. And then something that's causing a migrating motor complex dysfunction. One of the things that happens in post-infectious irritable bowel syndrome is there can be toxins. One particular toxin called cytolethal descending toxin has an adverse effect. And what it does is it triggers the immune system to start producing immune reactions to different protein structures in the small intestine, something called vinculin. And over time, these what are called antigen antibody reactions destroy something called ICC. ICC stands for the interstitial cells of Cajal. These mediate the enteric nervous system. So think about the enteric nervous system. They often talk about that being the second brain. It's a very large, complex part of our nervous system that tells the digestive system how to function, and it can get damaged. It can get damaged because of inflammation. It can get damaged because of toxins that are affecting the nervous system. It can get damaged because of autoimmune reactions attacking these interstitial cells that mediate transmission in that area. One of the things that can contribute and sometimes cause SIBO is Helicobacter pylori, a bacterial infection that affects the stomach. There are other digestive system imbalances as well. Okay, so let's go through a little of this. H. pylori, or Helicobacter pylori, is a bacteria that infects the lining of the stomach. And the stomach being that place where we have tremendous amount of hydrochloric acid production that's really important for protein digestion. But the acidic environment of the stomach is also an immune defense. It's not typically an immune reaction, but the acidic nature of it can kill off a lot of opportunistic pathogens that might find their way into the body. How H. pylori works is it evades the acidic environment in the stomach by releasing certain enzymes. It has an enzyme called urease. Urease helps to break down urea that's in the stomach, and that produces ammonia. And that ammonia neutralizes the acid in the area where that H. pylori is living. And then the H. pylori have this little flagella tail structure that allows it to burrow itself into the lining of the gut. And it can survive there for years, just sitting there slowly eroding in the area of the stomach. And that then can lead to ulcerations. H. pylori is also a gram-negative bacteria. That means it has, as part of its cell membrane, something called LPS, lipopolysaccharide. H. pylori can also induce many pro-inflammatory chemicals. It can trigger mast cells, which release histamine that causes or can cause damage within the gut. It can release these pro-inflammatory immune chemicals that can have not only local effects in the gut, but also systemic effects throughout the body, including the nervous system, including the enteric nervous system, the nervous system within the gut. It can trigger immune reactions. It can trigger a host of other inflammatory reactions as well. Okay, and lipopolysaccharide is important to remember because it's a component that it itself is linked to inflammation. Gram-negative bacteria are normal bacteria, along with some gram-positive bacteria in the digestive system. Not all bacteria in our gut are bad. Some of the normal bacteria that live in our digestive tract, including the large intestine that could find their way into the small intestine, carry this LPS, this lipopolysaccharide chemical, as part of their outer cell membrane. E. coli, Enterobacter, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, for example, are gram-negative bacteria. Lipopolysaccharide in an excess amount can trigger inflammation. It can trigger insulin resistance. It can even trigger immune reactions in the brain and nervous system. LPS can be produced by prolonged exercise, inflammatory bowel conditions, severe infections, even chronic alcohol use. And LPS has a direct, or can have a direct, damaging effect on the tight junctions within the lining of the gut, because the tight junctions become damaged, and that's essentially what leads to leaky gut. So it's very possible that in people with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, they can have leaky gut that worsens their situation. Now, let me go back to the slide real quick. I want you just to take a look at the architecture here of the tight junction in the digestive tract. It's got the zonulin proteins, the claudin, the occludin. Let me get rid of this and we'll fast forward. Okay, right here on the left-hand side is the tight junction that makes up the blood-brain barrier. It has occludin proteins, zonulin proteins, the claudin proteins. It has a very similar architecture to the tight junction in the intestine. So it's possible for us to develop not only leaky gut in the gut, but also a leaky blood-brain barrier. I'm going to have to figure out why my thing is automatically fast forwarding here. Let me go back real quick. Sorry about that. So what I wanted to say is we now can have a component between inflammation in the gut and inflammation in the brain and nervous system. And these inflammatory reactions that are affecting the gut lining as well as the blood-brain barrier that are coming because of chemical production from the digestive tract can trigger something called phospholipase A2. And phospholipase A2 is an enzyme, when it's high, that can start to break down the cell membrane of our cells, including cells within the brain and nervous system. Phospholipase A2 is a link to systemic inflammation. It's not disease specific because it's been found elevated in many different types of chronic health conditions. But it's a problem and another level of assessment that you should be doing because it has significant implications for long-term health, not only from a gut standpoint, but from an immune system standpoint, cardiovascular health standpoint, and brain and nervous system standpoint. Great Plains Laboratory has that test, the phospholipase A2 test, as part of the profile. It's a urine test. And we have to think about all of these factors, okay, from the pro-inflammatory cytokines to the autoantibody reactions to phospholipase A2. It's, when I say nervous system, I'm not just talking about the brain, okay? Our gut is a large nervous system too. And so the nerves that flow through our digestive tract that make up this migrating motor complex can be damaged because of things that are not only happening in the gut, but also happening systemically in the body. And so SIBO is much more than just a gut problem. It's much more than just an issue that just developed on its own. It's being caused by something else, sometimes multiple things. It can be extremely difficult to treat because people are dealing with it for, sometimes years. And the damaging effects in some cases can be long lasting. Testing for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is absolutely essential. You cannot assume that this condition is occurring. You really need to get the test as best as possible. In certain populations of people, that's not always an easy thing to do, like the autism population. It's not easy to do these kinds of tests, but it's easier in older individuals. So as you can see in this particular profile, we've got this thing keeps jumping ahead, sorry. We've got an individual here who has normal levels of methane and normal levels of hydrogen, despite the fact that they may have some bloating and gas or maybe loose stool or constipation. If that's the case, it's coming from something else. Here's an individual that has very high levels of methane. Okay, we've got methane down here at the bottom. And our methane is here based on the green line. Elevated methane would typically be more linked to constipation, but you can have a mixed pattern. You can have high hydrogen and high methane. The take-home point is this test by itself is not enough information. It defines SIBO. It's definitely telling you that it's there. It doesn't tell you why it's happening. So other testing is important. And this is where I really start to expand the horizons here, to get beyond just SIBO testing, but to start to look at H. pylori infections, parasites, Clostridia toxicity, organic acid testing, glyphosate, phospholipase A2, and even, yes, starting to incorporate information regarding mold toxins. We'll talk about that here shortly. Let me show you just a quick example of some tests beyond just SIBO testing. So this is an individual that did a SIBO test, a lactulose profile, and it shows high levels of hydrogen, okay, at 77, and we've got a moderately elevated methane. So we've got a positive SIBO test, mostly hydrogen-based. So typically this person, if it were to occur, would have more issues with loose stool or diarrhea. But they also had H. pylori. So if all you did was the SIBO test, you're going to miss the boat on all of these other factors. And that could be one reason why some of these individuals with SIBO don't get better. Because SIBO has a high recurrence rate. It has a tendency to come back because people aren't doing enough testing. They're just assuming, let's just kill off the bacteria in the small intestine and call it a day. And that's usually not enough. This person also has H. pylori. Okay, that could be a contributing factor to their SIBO. They have a ton of candida on a stool test. It's kind of rare actually to find candida on a stool test, but this particular person has a candida overgrowth. They also have some invasive candida as well, okay? The levels aren't extremely high. This is an organic acid test from Great Plains, but there is a yeast issue. We also have H. pylori. But what is also elevated on this person's test is high HPA linked to Clostridia bacteria. And that's a real problem because Clostridia and that particular toxin is toxic to the nervous system. HPA coming from different types of Clostridia bacteria can inhibit the enzyme that helps us to normally metabolize dopamine, causing dopamine levels to rise within the nerve cells of the body. And when that happens, the elevated dopamine can have a toxic effect over time. And when I say toxic effect, it means it can affect its function. You start affecting the function of a nerve cell. The nerve cell function is in the case of, let's say, the gut, the nerve cell is talking to the muscles in the gut for normal activity and movement. Now all of a sudden you've got, you know, a gut motility problem that could occur. On the organic acid test is some other markers. Here we can see elevated dopamine. Okay, that's the HVA that's high. That's happening because of the Clostridia toxin. We've also got high levels of quinolinic. Quinolinic is also neurotoxic. Okay, it damages nerve cells within the nervous system. This individual also had elevated phospholipase A2. So we know, based on what we're seeing, that yes, there is SIBO happening in the gut, but there's an H. pylori infection affecting the stomach. That's going to affect digestion. We've got candida overgrowth, so there's a fungal component. We've got Clostridia toxicity. Not only is it going to irritate the bowel, but it's also going to affect the nervous system. And now we've got systemic inflammation happening that will affect the whole body. It's not good enough to just throw a bunch of stuff to kill off the bacteria randomly in the small intestine. From a SIBO standpoint, we have to take a much more comprehensive view and approach. We also need to be aware of mold, okay, because mold is a contributing factor to this as well. There's now something called small intestine fungal overgrowth, or SIFO. I mean, somebody is creating another syndrome. The reality is it's always been there. We've always known it's been there. It's just understanding that that too is a causative or contributing factor to SIBO in some individuals. The organic acid test looks at a number of different metabolic toxins. You'll notice in this particular person, we've got elevated HPA, just like the last test. Okay, so we know we've got a Clostridia problem. We've got some other bacterial markers here. This is driving me nuts. Sorry about that. I don't know why it keeps, I have to fix that. Okay, we've got some other bacterial markers that are high. We also have a bunch of different markers that indicate fungus exposure. Here's our markers linked to invasive candida. That clearly is happening. Numbers 2, number 4 are specific to mold exposure. When you see 2 and 4, also 5, 2, 4, and 5 elevated on this test, it's showing you that there is a mold colonization, mold growing in the gut. Now, these two particular markers actually come from Aspergillus mold, get some from Penicillium too. And these are very common molds that many of us are exposed to, mostly through food. Aspergillus is fairly common in food, as well as our environment. Okay, we're all exposed to Aspergillus, but not everybody gets sick from Aspergillus. But some people can get sick. Okay, this is just a short list of mycotoxins. Okay, mycotoxins are toxins from mold. Mycotoxins can induce headaches, digestive problems, nausea, vomiting, immune suppression. They can affect the liver, they can affect the kidneys, they can affect muscle coordination, and even cancer in some cases. Or they can cause cancer in some cases. So another test that you need to learn how to do and start running on individuals is the Great Plains MycoTOX Profile. And the MycoTOX Profile analyzes at this point 7 different mycotoxins being produced from 4 different types of molds: Aspergillus, Penicillium, Stachybotrys, Fusarium. Some of these toxins are extremely toxic. Aflatoxin M1 and Ochratoxin A are fairly common. That doesn't mean that's okay, they're just common. Some of these others, like Roaridin E, for example, or Verrucarin A, can be produced by Stachybotrys, the black mold. This particular toxin, abbreviated Zen, can alter the function of the digestive system. Okay, it itself can affect the tight junctions and therefore affect the overall immune function in the gut. If you affect the immune function of the gut, you're now at more risk for opportunistic infections. Aflatoxin M1, which is produced by Aspergillus, is a known carcinogen. It also attacks the liver and can cause gastrointestinal dysfunction. You can see in this particular test, somebody has very high levels of the Aflatoxin M1. And this is found in various foods. It can also be found in water-damaged buildings. Ochratoxin, or Ochratoxin A, also comes from Aspergillus, as well as Penicillium mold. It can affect kidney function, it can affect liver function. It too is immune toxic. And the problem is that particularly Ochratoxin, it, in association with aflatoxin, is almost synergistic. Okay, these things are made more toxic when they both are occurring. But the Ochratoxin A particularly increases opportunities for invasive candida and Clostridia bacteria. So the MycoTOX panel is an important assessment to bring into play here as well with anybody who is either dealing with SIBO where it's been confirmed or it's being suspected. So where does glyphosate come into all this? Okay, glyphosate, this is, you can see in this particular sample here, the glyphosate level was very high. Glyphosate is found in a very common herbicide, sprayed on genetically modified food. Okay, these GMO foods are made to tolerate glyphosate. And what glyphosate is doing is it's inhibiting an enzyme that affects the way weeds grow and other plants grow. The problem is that sitting in the way is our own digestive bacteria, our own microbiome. The normal bacteria in our the normal bacteria in our intestinal system will utilize things like tyrosine and tryptophan and phenylalanine for their own proliferation and own growth. But the glyphosate puts a stop to that. Okay, it inhibits this EPSP enzyme. We get a decreased utilization of these amino acids from our own microbiome, the microbiome diversity starts to die off or become limited, and that increases the potential for other pathogenic bacteria. Salmonella, for example, or Clostridia as well. And basically that means that people who have chronic glyphosate levels could end up having a lack of normal diversity in the small intestine and be more predisposed to pathogens, some of which could be a causative or contributing factor to SIBO. So there are some different types of treatment options. To do things right, do things from a comprehensive standpoint, dietary intervention is key. I mean, that's not unique to SIBO intervention. That's the same with anybody with inflammatory bowel disease or chronic, candida issues. But dietary intervention is key because you're not going to get very far in intervention if somebody's not doing some things to improve their diet. Digestive system support is essential. Okay, we can't just throw a bunch of herbs or antibiotics at the small bowel. We have to work on digestion too. That may mean stomach digestion. That could be small intestine digestion with enzymes. Yeah, we have to reduce the bacterial load in the small intestine if SIBO is happening. Okay, and that can be done in a number of ways we'll talk about. We also have to work at restoring normal gut mucosa health, okay, because of all the damage that has occurred long term. And that's not always an easy fix. Sometimes that can be an ongoing process that could take months or years in some individuals. Preventing relapse is really important. And the main way that we prevent relapse is we take a comprehensive view. We work on digestion. We work at reducing bacterial load in the small bowel. We do an extensive workup to figure out what else may be causing the problem. Parasites, H. pylori, for example, Clostridia, mold. Work on those factors too. We work on the health of the large intestine. Liver gallbladder support is important. And then motility, okay, because if these toxins are occurring, they're going to affect motility issues. Here's the honest truth about SIBO. Some people who have been suffering with it for years may never be completely normal as far as normal function of their digestive tract. Okay, it may never fully come back to where it was. It doesn't mean that they live in misery the rest of their life, but they may always have to be diligent with their diet. They may always have to be watching for what they're exposed to, because that it's just the nature. There may have been there could be damage that's occurred that just doesn't fully normalize for them. Now that, again, that's very individualized, very person specific, and that's usually people who have been dealing with things for years and years. That doesn't mean they can't be helped, but not every single person with SIBO is going to get 100% resolution of their problems because, again, there may be too much damage. But that's the case with anything in medicine from a chronicity standpoint. Improvement, yes, but total recovery for some, for most happens, but for some may be limited. Dietary intervention is key. Okay, low FODMAP diet, sometimes the specific carbohydrate diet. There's now something called the biphasic diet. All of these things are being used to try to reduce the fermentable products or food sources that tend to create the gas in the digestive system. But oftentimes this isn't enough. Okay, we've got to go in there and work on other things. Elemental diet is something that definitely can help with GI dysfunction in SIBO. This is not something that's supposed to be used forever. This is a short intervention to really try and knock back the bacterial load in the small bowel. And then we get into the traditional ways of treating SIBO. Now, you've seen the commercials on TV of Xifaxane, the irritable bowel with diarrhea commercials where they use this antibiotic. And admittingly, this is a shotgun approach. It can work wonders for some people. Okay, it knocks the bacterial levels back. And if you're lucky, that may be all you need to do. Usually it's not enough. But from a conventional medicine standpoint, most conventional docs don't know what else to do. Okay, so they might recommend a probiotic, but they just know to use an antibiotic. Again, not inappropriate, but it really needs to be used in conjunction with other gut supportive health promoting things. By the way, the rifaximin or Xifaxane is typically used for hydrogen dominant SIBO. That's why it's associated with irritable bowel and diarrhea. Other antibiotics, Flagyl, neomycin, or neomycin combined with rifaximin is often used when we've got methane involved. Now that might mean methane dominant or just methane plus hydrogen, a combination. But again, these things are typically, from a conventional standpoint, used for a couple weeks, and a lot of docs don't ever think about using anything else. And that's where we run into problems, right? Because the recurrence rates of SIBO are very high. If you've heard me lecture before about Clostridia bacteria, one of the things I try to emphasize is that Clostridia bacteria have a very high recurrence rate because they're a very sophisticated organism. They're difficult to get rid of, and they have a very unique survival ability, and so therefore they tend to come back. The problems tend to come back. SIBO is similar to that. There is a very high recurrence rate because there's many moving parts to a SIBO condition. It's not just what's happening in the small intestine. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of great supplement companies out there that have a lot of great products that we can use at our disposal. BioBotanical Research has great products. Claire Labs has some great products. Biomatrix, a company that has some unique products as well, all have their niche when it comes to supplement support. Biobotanical Research actually has some great products. And if you've heard me talk before about fungal issues or Clostridia bacteria, you've heard me talk about Biocidin. Okay, I love Biocidin. I've had great success with Biocidin in treating resistant Clostridia issues. They now have this Biocidin LSF, this liposomal form, New Beginnings Nutritionals, which is linked. It's a supplement company that is often linked to these tests from Great Plains. They carry many of these products now too. This has been a very effective remedy for Candida, for SIBO, for even some parasites, and now it's even being shown to be effective against certain molds. GI Detox, which comes from Biobotanical Research, is a combination of pyrophyllite clay and activated charcoal. Think of it like a mop or a sponge to help soak up some of the toxins that get produced in the digestive system. We're now using this quite a bit for mold, people exposed to mold and mycotoxins. It's always been in play for fungal overgrowth. When you're treating SIBO, there's going to be a die-off effect, or there can be. And it's important to use a sponge-like product like this to soak up those toxins so they don't get absorbed and cause reactions. So these binding agents like the GI Detox, which are usually well tolerated, by the way, even in kids, are absolutely essential. This is a product I'm starting to use more now. This New Beginnings Nutritional is carrying this called IgG powder. And the literature on it is pretty impressive in the fact that it helps to bind certain chemicals that get produced in the digestive system. And if we relate it, I mean, I could take this entire list and relate it to different things, but we're right now we're talking about SIBO, right? So we know in SIBO, certain individuals might produce high amounts of lipopolysaccharide. That's what can trigger inflammation. It can lead to leaky gut. It can lead to a leaky blood-brain barrier. So this IgG powder has a binding effect to LPS. It also binds to the toxins of Clostridia, toxin A and B. These are the toxins that typically are generating diarrhea or inflammation linked to C. difficile. I don't know its effect on, let's say, the 4-creosol or the HP-HPA toxins from Clostridia, but there's probably a pretty good chance it would bind those too, or at least slow down their absorption. It can bind to something called zymosin. Zymosin is part of the fungal cell wall, okay? So if you've got a mold overgrowth or a fungal overgrowth in the gut, this product can help with that. And then it binds to a bunch of other bacterial components as well. I think this is a great product to add in, as to just think of it as it's like like GI Detox when BioBotanical was kind of a sponge itself. These are toxin-specific sponges. This product, that's the way I would look at it. So this New Beginnings Nutritionals is carrying this now. We can't forget about biofilm. Okay, biofilm is a component of any fungal overgrowth issue. By the way, when I say fungus, that means yeast, mold, and mushrooms. Candida is a yeast. So all of that falls under the biological grouping of fungi. Biofilms get formed. And yes, there can be a biofilm problem that happens in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth as well. Claire Labs actually has some great information on different products that are useful for gut dysbiosis and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this interface, where their Interface Plus products are great as biofilm busters. So to recap, okay, SIBO testing is important, but it's one stepping stone of intervention, of assessment. I highly recommend the organic acid test. I recommend the glyphosate test. I definitely recommend the mycotoxin profile. Comprehensive digestive stool testing can be important too, along with your SIBO assessments. Now, we have a website called labtestsplus.com. We carry tests from Great Plains. We carry tests from BioHealth Laboratory, which carries the SIBO profile, and other labs like Doctor's Data. So these are open for people to order, and then every test comes with a written review of findings and what I call action step suggestions. So you can go to that website and look up what tests we have available. We've also just created a series of videos that are on this site for SIBO specific concerns. So labtestplus.com. Now, coming up in a couple weeks, we are launching a new SIBO mastery course. This is a 9-module course that will be extremely extensive on SIBO assessment, intervention, diet, testing, treatment, and then expanding to other areas. A lot of what I've talked about here, but much more in depth. Co-infections, Clostridia problems, organic acid testing, fungal issues, Helicobacter pylori, parasites, because it's important to me to not just have individuals just solely focus on SIBO, assuming that everything is related to that, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to come across people that think they have SIBO, you test them and they don't, but they still have chronic gut problems. You got to keep digging further, because not everything that looks like SIBO is SIBO. Okay, so this starts on Tuesday, June 5th. There's early bird discounts available. There's continuing education credits available. There's course exams. So SIBOmasterycourse.com, or you can go to, if you have any questions, you can email to SIBOmasterycourse@gmail.com. If you want a special report book, you can text to 66866 and you can get a copy of this Uncovering the Facts About SIBO, Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth. Again, SIBO, text SIBO to 66866. We also are relaunching our toxicity mastery course. Part of this course was talking a lot about glyphosate toxicity. Every one of our mastery courses also goes over extensive information on the organic acids test. How does the organic acid test relate to toxicity issues? How does it relate to mold issues, for example? This is also a 9-module course. There's now over 4 hours of lecture material in the new format of Toxicity Mastery related to mold and mycotoxins, as well as chemicals and heavy metals, detoxification, testing, etc. So this is going to be launching again on Monday, June 18th. So it's possible as practitioners, and these courses are designed for healthcare practitioners, but anybody can take them. Okay, they're not locked. We're not locking anybody out, but we just let people know that the content is health practitioner created. So some of it, it's not that people can't understand it. We just talk about certain biochemistry and that kind of stuff. So again, these are launching over the summer. So actually by the end of this summer, you will have tremendous amount of ability to treat people with SIBO issues and a whole host of toxicity issues. For more information, you can go to toxicitymasterycourse.com or email to toxicitymasterycourse@gmail.com. And again, there's early bird discounts available. I'm also available for private consultations. Best email to reach my private practice is the scmedicalcenter@gmail.com. MySunriseCenter.com is the practice website. If you did submit any questions for this webinar, what Great Plains will do is they will email those questions to me, and then I'll answer back through email. Again, I think that the take-home message when it comes to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is we got to become more comprehensive. This is why the condition is so difficult and why so many people are failing their initial treatments, is there's other things happening that they don't know is happening, and that's causing long-term problems. So I hope this was useful information for you. I always enjoy presenting this kind of information, and I'll be back again next month on another specific topic. Okay, so once again, this is Dr. Kurt Woeller for Integrative Medicine Academy doing a complimentary webinar through Great Plains Lab. Have a good day, and we'll talk soon. Take care.